Hello there. It is Pooch with another episode of Should Have Been a Starter. And of course, we are speaking about what is no doubt the most incredible rugby championship. It has been a few days delayed since the weekend's results. And I'd like to say it's more a fact of reflection on the weekend, not coming onto the podcast necessarily to overly gloat without real substance. So taking these last few days, rewatching the game a couple of times to no doubt celebrate the way the Springboks played at the weekend, but equally, how do they execute? Equally, where did it all go wrong for New Zealand? Certainly 50 minutes of unanswered points from South Africa, 5 tries, 0 points for New Zealand, which led to a record defeat for New Zealand, not since, for me, the 2019 semi-final against England has New Zealand been put to the sword so clinically as the Springboks this last weekend in Wellington. I know the Springboks did have a big win in London prior to the 2023 World Cup, but not a game that had as much riding on it, certainly than the 2 tests mentioned previously. And as far as the poster for this podcast on YouTube, jubilation for the Springboks, embarrassment for the All Blacks. And in the other game, the Wallabies' ill discipline cost them, despite scoring 4 tries to 1. The Los Pumas held off the valiant fight back by the Wallabies. But I've mentioned dawdlers, meaning slow start once again for the Wallabies, and resilient for the Los Pumas, fighting off a couple of refereeing decisions going the Wallabies' way to really make that game a lot tighter than it was overall. The congratulations to the Los Pumas, again, proving the value that Argentinian rugby is bringing to the Rugby Championship, not only in their style and well-rounded style at that, but equally fantastic fans bringing that soccer, football type atmosphere to both Townsville previous week and then Sydney this last week. Something special that the other teams don't offer. Right, what I'll be doing is talking a little bit more in depth about that Springboks victory against the All Blacks in a little bit more detail. The 4 key areas of concern, if I was an All Blacks fan, not only about this last game, but overall as a national team and entity, to the comparisons of 2 teams in particular that I think the All Blacks and their fans overall should consider as far as where they're at. And then really lightly touching on the Wallabies Los Pumas game. If you haven't, please like and subscribe. I'm up to roughly about 120 subscribers. Hey, all things start from humble beginnings. So hopefully if I can ramp that up to 500 subscribers, I will be over the moon. May even be able to get an editor to get these videos out more quickly and equally, hopefully, better quality. Really appreciate your support. Please do comment, note where I've missed out on a couple of points in the games. Equally, do you agree with the comparisons of the 2 teams? I will mention both non-rugby teams for the All Blacks. I'd love to hear your comments, so please do like and subscribe, and it will be great to hear from you. Right, I mentioned in the build-up to this game, seeing that team sheet and what a positive frame of reference it is when Rassie Erasmus comes out at the start of the week and says, this is our team. This is who we are, and it's up to you to deal with us. For me, I've always loved that approach. There's been only very few occasions where Rassie has held off on naming his team and named it in line with regulations. Setting your stall out early really gives the players confidence, in my point of view. And while an unpredictable team, which is not unusual for Rassie, certainly in relation to the back line, I really like the fact that he put his stall out early. And I said in the last podcast, this, if South Africa played really well, could form the passing of the torch, passing of the baton from the OGs, the old guard, to the new generation. And that doesn't mean, by all means, please, fellow Springbok fans, I am not saying by any stretch that I do not want to see the Andre Pollards, Damien Delandes, the Jesse Creels of the world play a Springbok test again. Of course not. They will be vital components to a successful 2027 campaign and a successful Springbok team over the next few years, regardless. However, building momentum and synergy, no doubt, will be something Rassie is eyeing out. And the Damien Willemse Moody combination has been rumoured for some time. And of course, the emergence of Sasha Feinberg and Nkomazulu, seen as a generational talent, and rightly so, will really be the new age of the Springboks. So it's ushering in that new period. The first 15 minutes of that game was absolutely electric, and namely the Springboks putting on the pressure against the All Blacks. Had it not been for a bit of skill execution, a few personal errors, we saw Kobus Reinach knock that ball on for the first try, which was called back. I think he had 2 or 3 knock-ons from the back of rucks during the game, possibly the only thing we could point to as being something we could tidy up from that game overall. And then a brilliant try by the All Blacks, really well executed, remnants of the golden era of All Black Rugby, the ability to draw in and get the ball out wide quickly. Leroy Carter getting a try early on into his All Black debut. I thought Leroy Carter looked lively on the wing and certainly got off to a good start in his All Black career. However, the potential defining point of the game overall was no doubt Cheslin Colby's intercept, denying the All Blacks going 14-0 up. Now, All Black fans can look at that and go, we could have been 14-0 up, and that changed the game. Backline, for me, there was only the smallest chances of that being the case. When you look at the exuberance, the confidence, the tenacity that backline came out and played for the Springboks, for me, had they gone 14-0 down, the Sashas, the Damiens, the Canaans were laser focused in executing during that game. South Africa's ability to navigate the constant injuries and HIAs, in particular in the backline throughout the first half, and then Cheslin Colby in the second half, early in the second half, was something to behold. It is something South Africa, as a coaching as a team, a coaching ticker, and as fans, we can be extremely proud about. I do remember thinking that when Cheslin Colby was going off, thinking our backs are against the wall here. Colby, a Springbok all-time great, the best winger on the planet, goes off after a slightly rough start. Jody Barrett ripping the ball from him. I think it was one other error. So indifferent start by Cheslin Colby's exceptional standards to then getting his try. And then as soon as he got that ball on the wing, you knew what was happening. That right step is unbeatable. And so for him to then go off after getting those couple of tries, South Africa's backs were against the wall. But that is where South Africans are able to thrive. I thought the coaching ticket for South Africa were tactically brilliant this last weekend. James Parsons from Rugby Aotearoa, don't think that's pronounced properly. I do apologise. But a key stat that he brought up, which I thought was incredibly interesting, was the amount of reduced dominant carries by the Springboks at Wellington compared to Eden Park. And the reason why it's very interesting is when you have a dominant run, you're often then subject to a turnover because the support runners are often a second behind. And we think about Eden Park and how many times we lost the ball at the breakdown. Now, I think Ardie Savea still got 3, maybe even 4 turnovers during the game. Sometimes he is too good. However, the ability in the heat of the moment just to take the edge off your run and not overextend yourself, to remain within the support lines, was extremely impressive. And one chap in particular, Jasper Wiese, we know how dominant he is in the run, in the carry, and he did have a number of big carries. He definitely was able to bounce a number of All Blacks, but what he was able to do is control aggression, and therefore the ball was able to be recycled quickly. You think about the platform Grant Williams had the week before, constantly being hassled by counter rucks and balls being stolen at the breakdown, to this week Cobus Reinach having a far better platform in which to orchestrate the game and allowing our backline to really have a platform in which to attack. Ethan Hooker, wow, what a performance. I must admit, I did love this meme. Well, I do sympathise with Matt Williams just because I do think he has it out for the Springboks, and bless him. You can't have them all on your side. And, I think he's almost doubling down each and every time. But I did love that gag. I thought that was brilliant. But moving Ethan Hooker from the left to the right wing through the number of changes in the back line was brilliant in-game coaching. And it could seem obvious, but is often overlooked by other teams. And the reason being is you've got Cobus Reinach and Manie Lebach, both right footers. The tendency for their balls to, namely their up and unders, to mainly go on his side of the field. And the start that he had under the high ball, his ability to get up in the air, his athletic ability, well, I wouldn't say quite Joseph Suaalii to that extent. Wow, for a first start, what a brilliant performance. Flashes of brilliance, but then controlled within the structure that the Springboks want to play. That performance was mature beyond his years, and hearing him after the interview was extremely humble. What a player, and I can't wait to see him wear the green and gold more often moving forward. Manie Lebach, after what happened at Ellis Park, I'm not sure whether that was coaching or Manie, the start being incredibly well-rounded between kicking, passing, and attacking style at Ellis Park, to then being overly reckless. That was a team overall, not purely Manie, to then coming on early in a game where the pressure is on you to orchestrate that backline in the fashion that he did, playing extremely attacking, but controlled, varied in kicking and passing. Really, Manie Lebach. After the Ellis Park loss, I did say my frustration is that fans will look at Manie Lebach and say he can only play the Super Rugby style and it's not fitting for Test match rugby. And then you see the brilliant variation at this last weekend between ball in hand, his kicking game, his kicking for poles have improved. But to come in under pressure of what happened at Ellis Park, to orchestrate the game as he did, good on you, Manie. Man, that really filled me with a lot of joy because I'm a big Manie Lebach fan. He's really so talented. He is prone to a big error. However, nothing gets you off your seat than seeing players like a Manie Lebach and a Sasha. But for him to come in with Sasha going off so early on in the game and to execute and perform a well-rounded attacking game as he did, that shows what he is capable of. To then the hero of the day in particular, they're all heroes, but the man that stood out head and shoulders above all else, Damian Willemse. Much rumoured to be a future number 12 for the Springboks. Is he the new dawn of what a number 12 will look like for the Springboks and possibly World Rugby? Now, hear me out. Damien Diolande, Aki for Ireland, Dante for France, Barrett for New Zealand. All strong runners, really taking the ball straight and hard and often looking to run over their opposition to build front foot ball. Damien Willemse, from his school highlight days at Paul Roos to what we've seen early on in his career, could he be the 12 that really provides South Africa with that front foot ball by beating the first man through brilliant footwork? He's certainly a different player to Damien de Allende. And wow, that was certainly great to see the combination with him and Caden Moodie. Unbelievable. Damien Willemse, a two-time World Cup champion at such a young age, really, for me, matured a huge amount in the 2023 World Cup. When you consider a guy that had been moved around in a number of positions for South Africa, it was only 12, 18 months out where he's playing in Sydney at fly half for the Springboks. Again, good game, couple of average games between him and Mani that were trying to figure it out, to then coming in at the World Cup. I thought by the end of the World Cup, he looked like the best 15 in the world. However, his 12, if that game is a reflection of what he can do at inside centre, then put the number 12 on and moving forward. Sticking with Damien Willemse, when he scored that try, cutting through power, speed, and aggression, the emotion of scoring that try. Again, I don't think rugby players do that enough. It was so good to see him pumping his chest in ecstasy. Right then and there was a thought going through my mind of 1 or 2 penalty kicks and we'll win this. With so much time left, that is where my head was at. And I think when you play more experienced players, that's what can often happen, because there's been the emotional scars of New Zealand coming back to beat you, knowing what that All Black aura is about. And so typically when you have more experienced players, the base or the bad performance is higher than youth. Younger players can often be reckless and disjointed, and so their base is lower. However, their ceiling is often higher, because what they're not thinking of is, right, we just need to manage this game and see it through. What they're thinking is, let's lay it on. Let's keep going. Let's keep scoring. And it was phenomenal to see. But just in general, whether it's sport or corporate world, I know it from my career in sales. When I didn't know about potential objections and what the limits were in terms of what I could do per day or per month or per quarter, I just went and did it, and I kept going. It's only after a few scars and a few big knockbacks that your mentality often changes. And so I think it is because of the youth that South Africa just continued to kick on after that Willemse try and keep going and really lay it on those All Blacks. The speed of that game was phenomenal. The passion, the expression of ability for the Springbok backline in that second half was phenomenal. And of course, when you think about Eden Park and that first half, the amount of chances that went a begging for South Africa between the 80 minutes at Eden Park and the 40 minutes in the first half at Wellington, they then just clicked. And so going back to the Colby piece, had that not been intercepted, I still think South Africa would have gone on to win this game comfortably. It was just a matter of it finally clicking, where they took near enough each and every opportunity and were able to rack up, all of 5 tries in the second half. Let me know your thoughts. There is something about youth where they often don't know what the limits are. And while Damien de Allende, while Damien Willemse is a 2-time World Cup champion, he's 26? Caden Moodie, young. Ethan Hooker, young. Mani Lebok, that's his style, to keep attacking. And so to attack with the maturity that they did was phenomenal. And I said earlier in this podcast and in the last podcast, this could be the passing of the torch. And that is the performance where you do slowly start to pass the torch on, without giving the backs all the compliments. Certainly The line out for South Africa again was a little bit disjointed, but their ability to win opposition ball was phenomenal. Their scrums are really something to behold. This All Black team has been as good as any outside of the Springboks in World Rugby at scrum time. Their front row is phenomenal and certainly have stacked those loose forwards up and really are as good as anyone out there in the world. For South Africa not to get their just deserves at Eden Park at scrum time, to then probably the second half getting a little bit more reward for their dominance. Wow. Unbelievable how strong that South African scrum is and what a weapon it is. And moving to New Zealand, really outside of the Leroy Carter try and the intercept by Colby, I think there was only really one or two opportunities for New Zealand, if at all, to score points during that game. Will Jordan did a good line break, really poor pass out to Leroy Carter at his feet in the second half. And then the phenomenal dedication of Grant Williams to sprint full speed when it looked to be a certain try for Will Jordan in the corner, to tackle him and for him to leave it short. It really shows the why. Why do you play for South Africa? What it means to put on a Springbok outfit. That was displayed in the course of those 3 or 4 seconds when you watch him tear for the corner flag in a what looked like a valiant but unsuccessful chance of cutting off Will Jordan. Wow, that was phenomenal. That is as good as a try, watching Grant Williams take out Will Jordan just centimetres from that line. Will Jordan, one of the most phenomenal rugby players on the planet. You would have chalked that up on the scoreboard, but Grant Williams had other ideas and phenomenal. What was also extremely concerning for All Black fans was Beauden Barrett and Mackenzie's inability to ignite that backline at all in the second half. I'm a big fan for a chip over the top, especially when you've got a rush defence. But they were resorting to that after one phase play on a number of occasions. And they looked devoid of ideas, devoid of structure, devoid of set plays. That was extremely concerning from both a coaching point of view, but also players' management on the ground. Was that the best you could come up with? You know, I'd be extremely disappointed if I was an All Black fan, if that was all they were coming up with was set play, line out, get the ball, chip over the top, give it back. Same again, 1 or 2 phase plays. You know, you want to do that after getting some momentum with the ball going forward when the defence isn't set as well as it is for South Africa. Really was concerning to see the lack of options and the lack of creativity by the All Black backline. The 4 biggest concerns, if I was an All Blacks fan, and certainly this is not a Springbok fan looking to rub salt into the wounds, but really observing a team as with a phenomenal record and throughout the majority of my lifetime being almost unbeatable, having the most winning record in professional sports for a number of years. The All Blacks' 4 biggest concerns for me, and these often sink into each other. Some are immediate cures, and some are longer term, structural issues. Number 1 is conditioning. There was a bit of back and forth in that first half. Beauden Barrett got it and ended up clearing the ball into touch, and you could see heavy breathing. And of course, everyone, it was frantic. The speed of that game was phenomenal. Both teams exhausted. But to see an All Black team that traditionally in the last 20 minutes would run away with games because A, their style of play, but B, their conditioning was of that good quality that no matter how good you were, no matter how close you kept the game, in those last 20 minutes, the All Blacks would typically run away. They look exhausted in that second half. They look dizzy, and I think that the points are racking up, and yet they were chasing shadows throughout that game. The All Blacks looked knackered in that second half. And this has been an issue under Ian Foster, and it's still an issue now under Razor Robinson, that they are not the All Blacks of old that would always win the last 20 minutes of a game. Number two is player depth. And again, this is an instant cure. But when you consider international players, there's a big debate internally within New Zealand of whether they should adopt a Springboks and now Wallabies model of being able to select players from overseas. I understand the reasons for not, but equally, could you not come up with a formula? You had a Ghetto rule, a number of tests to then be selected. Why not have the sake of making up a Rebels rule? 6 Rebels, 3 players from the forwards, 3 from the backs that are all black players that are able to go and earn a really good wage and double their money overseas and still be selected for the All Blacks. What you're doing with the money saved for those 6 is being able to improve the grassroots game, or can be spread amongst potentially as many as 20 emerging talents. Just an idea. Equally, the player depth coming through, when you think about New Zealand, their junior All Blacks have been 5th, 6th in the world for many years now. So is it the attraction of basketball and other sports that is putting the All Blacks at risk because they don't have the player depth at their disposal? South Africa at one stage, before selecting players overseas, had 700 players playing rugby overseas. When you have a small population like New Zealand does, you have a small room forever in developing elite rugby players. And that is as a whole, between grassroots to schoolboy to how they manage the professional Super Rugby and the like, is a huge area of concern. And of course, within that player depth, New Zealand Rugby did themselves a disservice by trying to overextend themselves in negotiations while Super Rugby incorporated South Africa, tried to dominate the commercial terms, and ultimately South Africa made an easy decision to join the URC and play European rugby. We're playing very much in a similar time zone, and now New Zealand players don't have the ability to test themselves against a quality opposition. So the player depth is a huge issue for New Zealand, and not one rectified very quickly. Third is mentality, broken down into 2 parts for me. Team selection. I hear this often amongst Kiwi pundits and players, ex-coaches and the like, that when an All Black team loses, you want to give that same team an opportunity to redeem themselves. Okay, well, you lose one, then you win one. But then you're going to keep the same team because they've just won. And so we see the pattern of win, lose, win, lose. When will Ian Foster never really seem to make a bold decision around 5 or 6 players coming in with sweeping changes like Rassie has just done for this last game? We haven't seen that from Razor Robinson either. Is there a time that they make a bold move and go, for the next 3 or 4 tests, we're going to sling the hook, bring down the gauntlet, and aim to see Lester Fayanuku? We're going to see him in this position for the next 5 tests. For me, the Jody Barretts of the world, the Bowden Barretts of the world, we know who they are. You know what you're going to get. And so if those players aren't available, who were your next options? And certainly the mentality is also two-way in this regard, is the mentality of defending the record at Eden Park to knowing that you had a mediocre record at Wellington. So similar to South Africa, they certainly didn't perform to their capability at Eden Park, yet New Zealand aimed to really put a lot of emphasis in maintaining that record, considering they've lost a lot of other records in the last 5 or 6 years. But then knowing that their record wasn't as good at Wellington, is that a mentality thing? the ability to not be as consistent like they once were. And fourth is Razor Robinson, the golden child of Super Rugby, a record that will probably never be equaled, taking a Crusaders team year after year and winning against quality opposition even prior to South Africa leaving Super Rugby. The man who used to break dance, who was filled with enthusiasm and was filled with personality. Looking at him in that coaching box after the game, listening to him talk and sounding almost incoherent at the press conferences and trying to digest what had happened to that All Blacks team. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here trying to kick a man while he's down. I'm a huge fan. He's an extremely likable man and likable guy, Razor. But ever since he's come to take on the All Blacks, there's been a number of occasions, and in particular, obviously, after losses, where he's seemed to really be skirting round issues and not being able to clearly then and there say where that team went wrong. This isn't the first time, but heavy wears the crown, it seems. He doesn't seem to have the same enthusiasm for his job as he once did. And of course, the pressures of managing and coaching a team that once had the winningest record, he would have known full well what he was taking on. But it is interesting to see the fact that he doesn't seem to have that same enthusiasm. And I'm sure the losses don't help. And I'm sure he's found it harder than he thought he was going to find it. But it is concerning that he's never quite had that same personality ever since he's taken on the role. But that was exemplified on this last weekend when he was in the coaching box looking extremely disheartened, to really not being able to clearly explain or put a sentence together for me in a number of the post-game interviews. That is something to be really concerned about as an All Blacks fan. The two teams I would compare the All Blacks to is my beloved Manchester United. You had a golden era under Sir Alex Ferguson, a team over a 20-plus year span of brilliant players, but equally brilliant mentality, to Sir Alex Ferguson moving on, and a team that, while still has had success winning a Europa Cup, winning FA Cups and a League Cup, it's just not the same. And it's certainly taken many years for me to be able to digest that and for me to almost comprehend that, because I've always looked forward. When they've always got a couple of wins under their belt, I'm always thinking forward, we can get into this tournament, we can win this. When in reality, it's often been plasters over big cracks in the foundations. And while the sport is different, there is synergy there in terms of potentially All Black fans realising who they are. When Beauden Barrett won back-to-back World Player of the Years in 2016 and 2017, and this is even after the two potentially greatest rugby players of all time in Dan Carter and Richie McCaw, you still had Dan Coles and Cody Taylor at hooker. Now you've got Cody Taylor and a bigger drop-off. While I think the front rowers for New Zealand are very talented and really good quality, you had Crocker and Franks. You then had Retallick and Whitelock, still all-time great players in 2017. Scott Barrett was part of the makeup of that squad, but he certainly wasn't and probably still isn't at the level of a Retallick and a Whitelock. So it's more about the expectation management amongst fans. The realization that Benjamin Sesko for Manchester United is not Ruud van der Soroy, and Andre Onana is not Peter Schmeichel or Edwin van der Sar. That is the reality. You had Aaron Smith, had Israel Dag, had Sonny Bill Williams. You still had Kieran Reid in the team. Ardie Savea was coming into that team at that time. Ben Smith. one of the most underrated players. Now, a team that I think you could certainly look at is the Australian cricket team in the 90s and early 2000s. When you compare the All Black greatest, that 2011 to 2015 era, probably the greatest rugby team that's ever been, with the Dan Carter and Richie McCaw among those high-profile players I've just mentioned, and you compare it to the Australian cricket team of the 90s and early 2000s, when you had Langer, Ponting, Hayden, Gilchrist, Warne, McGrath. Those are some of the greatest cricket players of all time, and they're in the same team for year after year. Stuart McGill could turn it a metre and he couldn't even get into the team. But once those players went, there was this uproar within Australia that they're not, that it's the coach, it's this or that. You don't replace all-time great players, potentially with all-time great players. Now, they, after a few years, had the Cummings finally coming to life, Stark, to then Steve Smith, who is an all-time great, and Warner to a lesser degree. But you can't pitch any cricket team of any era against that Australia team of the 90s and 2000s. So is there a bit of self-realization as All Black fans to go, look, we rode the wave, and what a wave it was with those players. Now, it doesn't mean you still can't be number one in the world. It doesn't mean you are not able to win a World Cup by any stretch. But Man United over the last 10 years have won really big games. They've had their typical comebacks against great teams, but they've just lacked the consistency and they don't win week after week. And I think that is something, unless there are one or two players, the Steve Smiths, that come through for the All Blacks over the next couple of years, that might just have to be something that All Black fans and New Zealand as a whole come to terms with. I would love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully I've been able to articulate that in some form of sense that is able to make sense. I would love to hear your thoughts on the comparisons of Manchester United for those that do watch Premier League, and please take it easy. I'm a Man United fan. I am in fragile heart. The Springboks are the only ones keeping me sane at the moment. But certainly I think a comparison in terms of national teams with the Australian cricket team, right? You had a golden era of cricket for years. You are not guaranteed to be number one. You're not guaranteed to win every test, cricket or rugby, on the basis of what your team has done for 15 or 20 years prior. So is it an expectations management point of view? And equally, if you're going to redefine another golden era, that starts from grassroots to organizational structure and the like. And from what I've been hearing from Kiwis, is that there's a lot of work to do in terms of New Zealand rugby. Right, very lighthearted on the Australia game. Reason being is it had a very similar pattern to the previous game, where Australia again gave themselves a lot to do, almost their own worst enemy, really. In the first half, I do think Australia should stick with Tate Edmund. I think he's a guy that can offer a big ceiling. Carter Gordon, the chap who was flying half for them under Eddie Jones at the last World Cup, he is certainly someone they should be targeting to bring back from rugby league. It's been hit and miss for him in rugby league with injuries and the like. They are incredibly weak at fly half. There is lack of depth. Liner and Lolesio are just too light for me. And really, I think from a concussion and an overall health point of view, I'm not sure whether you can rest your country's hopes of a 2027 World Cup on either of those fly half. And so give Tate Edmund more time in the saddle. There will be mistakes, but there will potentially be a lot more upside, certainly in defence. But equally, where are the other options? Because O'Connor is great to have there as a bit of a backup and a fill-in and a more experienced player overall in terms of the squad. But as a team, they need to resolve such a critical position. Argentina, being a fan favourite of Albanos, certainly they've not missed a trick in Carreras and obviously the Carreras brothers. Yeah, this team under Contepomi still has that same guile, that same tenacity and doggedness up front in their forwards, but the ability to execute and take advantage of mistakes from the opposition is phenomenal. Their seventh team, I think they're number one in the world. So there is certainly huge ability within Argentinian rugby and their backline. And that is certainly something South Africa will have to look out for. South Africa, are they in pole position given they've got a game at home in South Africa? Who does Rassie pick? Let me hear your thoughts. Does he go back to the old guard or does he stick with his hot hand in the back line? Argentina having to play their home game in London. You know, you'd fancy South Africa, albeit I would not be surprised if Argentina steal the game off the Springboks. I will do a podcast in the lead up to the next series of games. And the Bledisloe, God, when you think both teams win that first game just over a week ago, the positivity rolling through Australia, and I still think there is a huge positive momentum with Australian rugby. How will the All Blacks have to sit on that stunning loss for 2 weeks before they're able to play again against the Wallabies? And I dare say the fury that will roll across New Zealand if they lose that first game. I could see them absolutely spanking Australia in a big comeback, which they've been known to do in New Zealand. Equally, God, if they get off to a bad start, where will New Zealand be? I can't wait for this next set in the most exciting rugby championship. Please let me hear your thoughts. I hope the points I've raised against New Zealand are considered thoughtful. It's not rubbing salt into the wounds, but really some reflection on a great team, organisation and country. And let's bask in the glory, South Africans. What a win that was. We've had plenty of those against us. So what a terrific win that was. Thanks very much for listening. Appreciate your support. Bye-bye.